Boston, January 15, 1919. The kind of morning that makes a city feel alive, children chasing carts, horses steaming in the cold, bakers laughing in the narrow streets of the North End. But above them, something waited. A steel tank, taller than every home around it, filled with 2 million gallons of thick, brown molasses. It glistened in the pale winter light, humming softly, like metal breathing. People said they could smell sweetness in the air that week. It clung to clothes, to hair, to memory. The scent of sugar meant safety, comfort, childhood. No one imagined sweetness could kill. A worker leaned his hand against the tank that morning. It felt warm, too warm for January. He looked up. A sound echoed inside, deep and hollow, like something alive turning in its sleep. He smiled nervously. "It's just settling," he said. And then the metal answered back. Before the wave, Boston was ordinary, beautifully, stubbornly ordinary. The North End woke beneath a pale winter sun, its narrow streets alive with clatter and breath. The air carried the scent of bread, sea salt, and chimney smoke. Fishermen shouted across alleys. Shopkeepers swept snow from their doorways. Italian and Irish voices mingled like music, building a rhythm of survival that pulsed through every brick and cobblestone. Children darted between horses and wagons, their laughter echoing against frozen walls, chasing warmth through the chill. At the edge of this life, the molasses tank stood like a watchtower, 50 feet tall, towering over homes and laundries, a monument to progress. To the families who lived beneath it, it was just another piece of the city, steady and familiar. When it leaked, they painted the stains brown and called it nothing. When it groaned in the night, they smiled and said it was breathing, alive in its own slow way. Inside the homes, radios whispered jazz, and newspapers promised change, prohibition on the horizon, jobs slipping away. Yet molasses remained constant, sweet and sure. It filled kitchens with the scent of comfort, pies, bread, syrup poured over morning porridge. It was the smell of stability in uncertain times. That morning, a deliveryman paused under the tank. His horse snorted, uneasy. He tugged the reins, glancing up. The air seemed too still, the hum too deep. Children waved, faces bright against the cold. The tank's shadow crept across the cobblestones, long, dark, deliberate, as if the city itself had taken one last deep breath before the scream. By late morning, the sweetness turned strange. The air hung thick, clinging to lungs, syrup scented and warm in a way that didn't belong to winter. It coated tongues, settled in hair, and made every breath feel slower, heavier. Seagulls drifted low over the harbor, circling without sound, uneasy shapes against the gray sky. Beneath them, the tank hummed, a deep, throbbing sound, more vibration than noise, like the heartbeat of something too large to see. Inside the Purity Distilling office, the clerk's pen wavered. Ink spilled across the page as the floor began to tremble, a faint rhythm that grew steadier, closer. On the street, a dog froze mid-bark, tail stiff, eyes fixed on the tank. Even the horses stopped their restless shuffling. It felt as though the whole city was waiting for something unnamed. Antonio, one of the maintenance men, heard it first, the sound of rivets straining, snapping sharp as distant gunfire. He dropped his wrench and climbed the ladder, boots scraping metal. Pressing his ear to the side, he felt warmth pulsing through the steel, steady and violent, like pressure begging for release. He shouted for the foreman, but the wind took his voice. Below, a group of children gathered where syrup seeped from the seams, running in dark ribbons down the side. "Look, it's leaking again," one laughed, tasting it on his finger. "Still sweet," he said. His mother called from the corner, but he didn't hear. The ground shuddered once faintly, then a second time. A rivet shot loose, whirring past Antonio's face. Another followed. The tank moaned, long, deep, almost human. Antonio turned toward the street, eyes wide, breath stuck in his throat. "It's going to give," he whispered. But no one stopped. The city kept breathing, blind to the warning, just seconds away from sweetness turning into death. 10:32 a.m. The first rivet broke free with a metallic scream, slicing the morning air like a bullet. For one trembling second, everything held its breath, then the world ruptured. The massive molasses tank tore open with a roar that shook the harbor. Steel peeled apart like wet paper, releasing a tidal wall of boiling brown syrup 8 meters high. It surged forward faster than a horse could gallop, darker than smoke, glistening in the winter sun like something alive. The sound was chaos, 1,000 shrieking metals, the crunch of splintering wood, the terrible chorus of voices swallowed by the roar. Horses reared and vanished. Wagons flipped, wheels spinning helplessly in midair. The sweetness in the air turned heavy, choking, sugar turned into poison. Antonio saw the tank split and tried to shout a warning, but the blast hit before he could breathe. The force flung him across the yard, his body swallowed whole by the oncoming wave. Windows shattered, walls buckled. The syrup rolled through the streets with the strength of a storm, carrying debris, barrels, people, and entire carts as if they weighed nothing. Train tracks twisted like ribbon. A freight car was crushed into the ground as if it were made of tin. A mother waded through waist-deep molasses, reaching for her child. Each step pulled her lower. The syrup gripped her legs, her arms, her hair, soft, relentless. Her scream was lost beneath the bubbling. Nearby, a fireman called for help, but the syrup closed over him before anyone could move. In a nearby stable, horses screamed, wild, human sounds. The wave hit, bursting through wooden walls and iron hinges, filling the air with splinters and sugar dust. Police whistles rose for a few seconds, sharp and desperate, then fell silent. The sound of the city became one long, low moan, the sound of air, syrup, and death blending into one. A deliverman's cart floated past upside down, wheels turning slowly in the thick brown current. A single dog barked once before disappearing beneath the surface. The flood reached the harbor, smashing ships against the docks. Boats lifted into the air, carried inland like toys before sinking into syrup-thick water. The sea turned brown and still, the waves too heavy to move. When the roar ended, the silence was unbearable. The city was unrecognizable, the streets buried under a crust of cooling molasses, glistening in the cold sunlight. Every movement, every cry was muffled by sweetness that would not wash away. 21 people dead, 150 injured, dozens missing. Entire families erased in less than 5 minutes. For days, rescuers waded through syrup that clung to their boots and tools. Even the harbor tides couldn't clean it. The smell of sugar hung in the air for months, thick, cloying, eternal. And beneath that false sweetness, Boston learned the truth: progress does not forgive, and even sugar can kill. When the roaring stopped, the city didn't. It just froze. The streets of the North End were gone, buried beneath a glistening crust of brown glass. The molasses had hardened into silence, smooth and still beneath the weak winter sun. Every wall, every doorway, every fallen life was sealed in sugar. Firefighters moved slowly through the ruin, their boots tearing free from the syrup with wet, sucking sounds. The air was thick, heavy, and wrong, a sweetness that clung to the throat until it burned. A rescuer stumbled over something solid and knelt. It was a hand, reaching upward, fingers stiff and shining like caramel. Nearby, a horse lay half submerged, its flank glittering in the light, frozen mid-motion. The smell was unbearable, candy and death, sweetness turned sour. They tried everything: shovels, hoses, salt water from the harbor, but nothing could break it. The molasses fought back, holding its victims close. Even after days, the syrup refused to release what it had taken. Men and women searched by feel, calling out names into a silence that swallowed them whole. Mothers whispered prayers over the hardened ground. A violin played somewhere far away, the melody trembling like a heartbeat under glass. By the fourth night, the wind turned cold again. Boston slept uneasily, wrapped in a sweetness it could not escape, a reminder that even the kindest things can kill when ignored too long. Weeks later, Boston tried to forget. Men shoveled until their backs ached, women scrubbed brick walls with vinegar and seawater, children stared at streets that no longer looked like home. Yet no matter how hard they worked, the sweetness lingered. In summer, when the air grew heavy, the smell rose again, warm, sticky, alive, creeping through alleys and open windows like a memory that refused to fade. The newspapers called it the Molasses Flood. The words looked ridiculous in print, as if the tragedy were some accident in a candy shop. But no one laughed in the North End. Families met in church basements, holding warped photographs and names written on damp paper. Their grief was quiet, patient, the kind that seeps into walls. When the lawsuits began, the company denied everything. They blamed temperature, pressure, even the hand of God. Not a single executive stepped foot in the wreckage. For 6 years, lawyers argued. For 12, survivors waited for justice that came too late to matter. In the end, the city won, but the payout was little more than the price of silence. Antonio's name never appeared in the papers. Nor did the child's who tasted the leaking syrup that morning. History remembered the tank, not the lives it erased. Yet every January, when the harbor mist drifts inland, the air still carries that faint sweetness, unsettling, almost tender, like guilt. Now cafes and apartments line those streets. Tourists walk past a single brass plaque dulled by time: Boston Molasses Flood, 1919. Nothing more. But the story remains, in every uninspected bridge, every cut corner, every quiet warning ignored because someone said, "It'll hold." Progress isn't the enemy. Forgetting is. What buried the North End wasn't just syrup, it was the certainty that something so sweet could never turn against us. And that certainty still lingers, a century later, in the air we breathe.